and you can also get the slides afterwards on our Support Center site. So the quick agenda for today, we're going to break down our session into 3 areas of discussion to see how mLevel aligns with corporate learning trends, instructional design methods, and modern learning strategies. So let's go ahead and basically dive into this stuff. I did a quick Google search to see what I could find on corporate e-learning trends, and found e-learning industry's top 10 list for 2015. So I was curious to see how mLevel aligned with these trends. And we do align very well. We're pretty strong in gamification, personalized learning, mLearning, and bring your own device, as well as responsive design and support for video. We do a decent job at integrating with our customers' existing LMS needs, and we actually have some customers that are using mLevel as a very affordable cloud-based LMS as well. We've not gotten into MOOCs or wearables as of yet, but I can report that our development team actually has an Oculus Rift. So we are always exploring potential options in this space in terms of augmented learning. And just in case the technology takes off, we'll be ready for it. So at this point, I'd like to take the opportunity to launch our first interactive poll so we can see how our listeners are keeping up with these trends that we just discussed. So Jake's going to go ahead and put that up there. Assuming
looks like we have an issue with the polls. They're not coming in at this moment.
All right, so we'll go ahead and skip the poll. Maybe we'll come back to that later if we can figure it out. Oh, there it goes. Great, so it looks like we have our poll up. So the question is, which e-learning trends have you used in 2015? So go ahead and select all that apply to this list. Give a couple of seconds here for people to go ahead and check those boxes, and curious to see what people are using. We're doing on the results here. Great, so looks like a lot of people are using the stuff that we're sort of in the area of alignment, so that's great. A few of you are using corporate MOOCs, so great news for us. All right, great, so let's go ahead and continue. So now I'd like to quickly cover how mLevel aligns with some of these trends. We'll start with gamification. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to our expert, Brian Austin, to help clear up the differences between gamification and game-based learning.
Cool, thank you. And you know, just for purposes of this, Jeff, if you'd like, you can kind of illuminate the, there should be a bullet underneath there, game-based. There we go. This is something that we often chat about with you know, with clients and organizations out there. Gamification is really using game mechanics. First began with website design and user experience there, and Dr. Carl Kopp is one that has made it very relevant to learning, as many of you know. But it basically is adding things like points, leaderboards, badges, and so forth in around traditional learning, whereas game-based learning actually has people play, and they will play discrete learning activities in order to accumulate those scores and so forth. But the act of playing the games is one of the things that really triggers much higher levels of engagement than typical gamification does. And in addition, it also makes a significant difference in terms of retention, which we'll be talking more about as a thread during this webinar. We believe in both gamification and game-based learning. Those of you that already use mLevel know that they're both embedded in there. But what we found in our research, and my personal research through Game On Learning, is that gamification can really trigger short-term engagement very well. But unfortunately, if you just put gamification elements around not well designed or not well effective learning, then you end up with more engaging, not very effective learning. So I think really both of these are important. mLevel is really committed to continuing the philosophy and strategy around game-based learning, because it does a better job of triggering the type of brain activity that's necessary for knowledge to actually be acquired. And for that reason, it's a really important part of what mLevel is and what it will continue to be. Jeff?
Great, thanks, Brian. And just to reiterate, mLevel addresses both gamification and game-based learning, so you can see that designated by our nice mLevel banners there. Great, so I'm going to go through some of these a little bit more quickly. So the next, I'd like to talk a little bit about personalized learning. How does mLevel align with it, and tailoring the learning environment for or by the actual user. So we do this in a few ways. So mLevel's Academy can do things like adaptive personalization, and we actually auto-detect what learners already know based on their past or previous gameplays, or actually during gameplay at some points. And we can exempt those items from appearing in the future from that activity in those gameplays. So that's a really great way to do that. And another way the product can create personalized learning is through study lists. So it's allowing a self-managed, personalized list from the user or from the learner himself or herself. And then also at the end of each gameplay, the learners can add suggested items that they get wrong. So mLevel does a great job of bringing those up to the forefront, allowing the user to sort of self-manage what they want. When we talk about mLearning, and we talk about bring your own devices, responsive learning, responsive learning. So what is it? It's basically, us using personal mobile devices that allow us to do learning at any time and anywhere. And it also gives us access to the same learning content across multiple devices, depending on what the learners want to use. So how do we align with this? We align perfectly with the mobile-based learning and BYOD trend. We actually allow learners to play games and activities on a desktop browser or on just about any mobile device for a seamless experience. So, and that's kind of how we fit into responsive screen sizes as well, and touch swipe capabilities. So all that contextual stuff to each device. And then lastly, learning is a great self-learning tool that's greatly underused, since tracking and measuring these results are often difficult. So this is where mLevel comes into play and can be handy, because we can help gauge your video's value by allowing you to measure with an assessment directly after a video. So you can do this in one of two ways currently in the system. So you can use the video activity followed by an assessment game, or you can actually embed multiple videos right into a Pathfinder activity and then quiz learners as the next step before they can complete the activity. So any questions at this point, Jay, coming in?
Nope, no questions yet.
Great. So I'm going to dive right into the instructional design methods then. So I'd like to briefly take a moment to talk about some popular ID methods and learning models. So before we do this, I'd like to fire up our second interactive poll to get a sense of what our audience is using in their learning and training programs. Hopefully our poll comes up this time. It seems like there's a little bit of a delay. There we go. Thank you, Josh. Which modern learning strategies do you currently use? So again, if you could select all that apply, that'd be great. Unfortunately, our GoToWebinar only allows us to list 5 options, so I've condensed the list down quite a bit for the poll. But we'll be sending out a post-webinar survey afterwards, so maybe we'll include a more.
Jeff, quick thing, interjecting. Is that the second poll that we have displayed there, or the third one?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's actually the third poll. So this is, yeah, so our polls are a little bit out. So we'll talk about learning strategies a little bit later. I don't know, Josh, if you can back it up and do the second poll. Maybe we can't. That's fine. That's the one I'm looking for. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
No worries.
Too busy talking. I wasn't looking at my screen. Great. So again, this is sort of a condensed list, and some of the more popular models being Bloom's taxonomy, Kirkpatrick's 4-level training evaluation. We have the ADDIE, which is analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. And I think Assure is one of the more popular items within Gagny's 9 events of instruction. So the poll results are coming in, and it looks like a lot of people are using different things, so that's great. Looks like ADDIE seems to be the most popular one, so that's good news for us. We can sort of look into that and see what's all involved in ADDIE and see how we can apply that as well. Some of the ones that we have actually talked about, we've actually created our learning games and activities to specifically align with various levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So we feel that IDs will benefit from using this framework to organize objectives, because it helps not only to plan and deliver appropriate instruction, but it also helps design valid assessment tasks and use strategies that ensure any instruction and assessment are aligned with these learning objectives. So, quick slide on showing how some of our activities in games align with the various levels of Bloom's. Some activities can hit multiple levels of taxonomy, depending on how an administrator sets them up and uses them. So if you're interested in learning more details about this slide or our activities and how they align specifically to Bloom's, you can visit our support center at support.mlevel.com and view our on-demand recording from our previous June webinar, which covers all of this. And then just in addition to Bloom's, mLevel also aligns very nicely with both levels 1 and 2 of the Kirkpatrick model. As you can see, mLevel is kind of a knockout at level 1 with an average user satisfaction rating that we typically get is about 95% or over. So I'd say that participants are overwhelmingly reacting favorably to our training platform. And then in terms of level 2, with our detailed analytics, we can track each individual's user's mastery or learner's mastery of the content within our activities and games, so you can see how well we align with that. And I'll just take a short pause now to see if any have any questions coming in. Great. So sorry I went through those sections a little bit quickly, but I know that we have limited time, so I wanted to sort of get into these sections, which is sort of the meat of what we're going to talk about today. So now that we have a good baseline and some additional context for understanding how we've set up mLevel to align with these innovative trends and science-based models, let's take a closer look at how you, as an admin of the product, can use it with some of these modern learning technologies listed here. But before we dive in, let's go ahead and bring in that final interactive poll that we had previously around modern learning strategies. So wait a little bit for that delay to kick in. And again, due to our limit of 5 options, I've consolidated these options a bit. So the question is, which modern learning strategies do you currently use? So go ahead and select all that you are using currently, which include blended learning, spaced intervals and repetition, bite-sized chunks, microlearning, feedback systems, or the gamification and game-based learning that we previously talked about.
Looks like they can only select one.
Good point. So it looks like you can only select one. So I guess we'll change the question to be, which do you feel is most important? All right, so it looks like blended learning is the winner, with microlearning and gamification or game-based learning as sort of second runner-ups, which isn't surprising. It's actually good news, too. All right, thanks for that poll. Appreciate it. All right, so let's start diving into these strategies a bit by first defining them, and then we'll provide some use cases and examples that relate specifically to mLevel, and I'll be asking Brian to give us some insight along the way. So let's talk about blended learning. We've found some studies that learners actually prefer to use a mix of e-learning and traditional training, and e-learning is actually great for conceptually getting topics and is flexible enough to serve both casual learning as well as just-in-time learning. So the issue is it's often hard to replace face-to-face interactions and then those human critiques that you get from instructor-led training. So that's where blended learning really comes in and is helpful. So at this point, how is this relevant for mLevel? I think I'll let Brian sort of talk about some of these things.
Well, Jeff, the most commonly viewed use cases on blended learning. I mean, today blended learning is really, really prevalent, in part because a lot of organizations have a very geographically dispersed set of training constituencies, be it sales forces or various plant locations, etc. It's rare that an organization of any size will have some, everyone kind of in one location. So breaking the learning into different modalities not only makes it more practical to disperse across a geographic area, either regionally, nationally, or globally, but it also makes the learning more effective. It ties into chunking and so forth, but which we'll talk about in a minute. But that's one of the big areas for use cases or various types of learning. Another one certainly is that in organizations hear this constantly, is we just don't have 3 days to train, 2 days to train, 1 day to train, 1 hour to train. And, blending the learning approach can allow a program to be sort of right-sized based on the amount of contiguous blocks of time that the learning constituency would actually have. One of the use cases that we've invested a lot of time in working with clients to develop is onboarding, for example. For those of you that have mLevel and haven't started using it in onboarding yet, this is turning out to be a really, really effective way to leverage the benefits that you get from onboarding, either with classroom training or virtual instructor-led training, leader-led, trainer-led programs, but the ability to layer in game activities throughout the training does several things. It really increases the retention. We've seen some examples where it can actually reduce the amount of time the onboarding program takes, from a calendar duration point of view. And one of the things that we hear back as well is that, wow, new employees, what a great first impression we made as an organization by extending something like this mLevel to them as they go through their onboarding training. So this is a terrific one, Jeff, and I think we would love the opportunity with any of the organizations on the call to brainstorm a bit more about potential use cases that would be specific to your organization.
Yeah, that's great. I think I also love the right-sized learning. So we've got bite-sized learning, and we also have right-sized learning. So that's awesome. I think it's important to note that you don't have to use mLevel to replace all of your training. It really works great as a complement to any existing training. So as listed here, if you've got, international, we're international ready. We've got multi-language support, geographical data centers, that are in all the different areas for the data security and for optimized performance. So it's really great for training across geos, and as Brian mentioned, it's awesome for just that sort of onboarding and pre-training type stuff too. So let's talk about a hypothetical example. So just kind of put this together based on something that I ran across online and some of the things that we've done with some of our customers as well. So an example of using a blended learning program would be something like doing a 12-month training program for new managers, and then utilizing e-learning in addition to a week-long live training event. So say 5 months before the live event, maybe managers do a self-paced e-learning using mLevel to learn the basics of the firm culture, the strategy, the management skills, and then use some Pathfinder activities to simulate handling real-life business scenarios. Then by the time the new managers meet for the 5-day event, they've been in the field long enough to discuss actual experiences and then forge face-to-face relationships with other managers. So maybe afterwards they continue to do some online simulations and mentor one another for several months. And then the learning division probably collects some survey data and can share the results from the mLevel's analytics. Brian, any other thoughts that you want to add to this example?
No, I think that's good.
Great. And then so just really quickly, some of the things that I found went onto workforce.com. There was an article, a great article about how Harvard Business School did a similar study, or a study of similar training programs, and they determined that managers can learn up to 5 times as much material at 1/3 of the cost compared to a classroom-only training approach. So that's pretty awesome. And then in addition, managers really liked the blended approach better, so they did some surveys, and before they took the blended approach, they were fine with the classroom-only approach, and then they took the blended, and they overwhelmingly liked that better. So good news there. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to spaced intervals and repetition. These are super important. So better learning happens when learners are exposed to content more than once over a period of time, and then in a number of different ways as well. So think about discussions, videos, games, and other activities that you can use. I'm going to let Brian talk a little bit about this side, this slide. It's about just the concept of how awful learning retention rates can be.
Yeah, I mean, I think many on this webinar have probably seen this information, or you perhaps have measured this information within your own organization for training. But it is a little scary, in my view, at least, how rapidly the knowledge and even skills that are imparted, for a training activity can drop off. You can see that less than half of it is still retained after 1 month, and it just goes drastically down from there. Corporate America, I think here, spends about $20 billion in training on an annual basis. And when you map this retention against that figure, it can be quite scary. And one of the things that I think is important for us, mLevel and the organizations that are on this webinar, is to really be more thoughtful about what we can do to increase the retention numbers, not only immediately after training, but beyond that. And personally, I think that the mLevel solution can be an invaluable tool in doing that. So, in fact, I think we even have, Jeff, on the next slide, some thoughts and use cases on that. These aren't specific use cases, but it's more areas of opportunity for each of the organizations on this webinar to take a look at. Low-hanging fruit, if you will. One of the things that's really key about spaced intervals and repetition, as Jeff mentioned, is the fact that you want to have people covering either the same material more than one time or from different angles, etc. It's really important in being able to acquire and anchor knowledge, and also to apply that knowledge into the skills and behaviors that result in improved job performance. The issue is, though, if you design training just to sort of force that repetition, it actually can sometimes have the opposite effect. So I like to think in terms of voluntary repetition. How can we have the folks that are going through training want to or be motivated to actually go through and repeat things until the knowledge is really embedded? And obviously, the types of short, high-paced, engaging games that are an important part of mLevel are, a natural way to do that. And, I think this applies not just to knowledge-based training, but it applies equally to skill-based training, where, we're teaching people how to perform a certain task or have a certain type of conversation. The repetition is critical. And the last thing I would say on this is, one of the things that many organizations realize they need to invest more thinking around is building a reinforcement track after a core training program. Think in terms of leadership training, customer service training, sales training, etc. You invest so much to connect people with that training and get them through a class, a blended learning program, etc. And then after that class, often nothing happens. And that's part of what causes that retention graph that you saw earlier to happen. And one of the things I think can make mLevel invaluable is to be part of a planned, proactive reinforcement strategy after the conclusion of the core program that may, depending on the skills involved, extend out for several months after the core program in short bursts at regularly spaced intervals in order to make sure that the training not only sticks but is really embedded. So, Jeff, I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Great stuff there. So I'll discuss a few examples here just to kind of keep that rolling. In a blended learning strategy, it could start with something like an e-learning course in week 1. Then after a short break, you use game-based activities to reintroduce and reinforce that sort of learning concept. Throw in another break there, then bring the audience into the classroom for an immersive role-playing exercise, and let them demonstrate their understanding with their peers. And maybe even a month later, that's not on the slide, but afterwards have them play some new games to refresh their memory and assess what they've remembered. Or if you're using a game-based strategy, like a full game-based strategy, and aren't doing any classroom training, maybe you deploy a variety of games over a period of time. So it's as simple as that. It's in week 1, start the video to introduce a concept. Then have the learner self-assess with Academy during that same week, just to ensure that all the concepts are covered. And then, in that same session, add a game to measure baseline of the knowledge and add an element of fun. I mean, it shouldn't take more than 10 minutes or so to kind of go through all those activities, assuming your video is pretty short. Then, let some time pass for week 2, maybe. Launch a few more games to assess the knowledge retention and recall, so you can kind of measure those results there. And then finally, in week 3, give them a scenario-based Pathfinder activity so they can test their understanding of the concepts in a scenario-based environment, and you can sort of get that measurement of how well they're learning and how much more they need. So let's move on to microlearning then. And microlearning is all about creating learning events that are focused, small, and easily consumed by learners. Today's learners are more pressured than ever to use their time wisely. They've got no time to spend their days in a classroom. They don't have hours to spend in an e-learning course. In fact, a recent Burson Research Bulletin reports that the modern learner has only 1% of their weekly time available for learning. So that's 4.8 minutes a day, assuming a 40-hour work week. So you can see that learning needs to be delivered quickly and flexibly. And then on the other hand, there's also a limit to the amounts of information that people can effectively learn and retain from a learning model. So the keys here are just, keep it short, keep it engaging, consider using a series of micro-learning events, but remember to use spacing, and as Brian said, don't overload it. Make some of that voluntary. And then Brian, I don't know, any thoughts on use cases for micro-learning?
Well, yeah, I think the first one is relatively obvious for those that are familiar with mLevel, because the whole concept of mLevel, mobile learning, short, highly engaging games, a casual learning approach that is available to folks whenever they have that, 4.8 minutes or what have you. But I think, a lot of my comments would be really around the second bullet, which is micro-learning allows training to just be more consumable. You do want to keep the duration relatively short. 30 minutes used to be a short e-learning course. Now that's no longer the case, and most organizations probably attending this webinar are getting feedback from the business saying, it needs to be 20 minutes, it needs to be 15 minutes, etc. And I really like the way that mLevel can sort of chunk learning activities in whatever duration is right for a particular, particular need. Not only is it more consumable, but it's much easier to assimilate. What we want to do with mLevel in learning is get the brain much more active and highly charged. That's engagement. A lot of people think of engagement as, usage, or they think of it as entertainment. Engagement as it relates to learning is really getting the brain operating at a high enough level to be able to assimilate and absorb knowledge or skill. And games are a phenomenal way to do exactly that. The other thing, and this relates back to what Jeff mentioned about micro-learning, is the ability to intersperse some of those micro sessions along with the spaced repetition, allows people to assimilate information from the learning and then leverage it in on-the-job experiences, and then leverage what they've learned on the job for the next micro-learning burst, etc. It's just a much better way and a more efficient and effective way to improve performance as we go. So these are some of the reasons that, again, for those on the webinar, we'd love the opportunity to brainstorm with you a little bit more about situations in your organization where this might work best. Jeff?
That's a great point. I think anybody who's looking for ideas, or who even has ideas that wants to share, I think we've tried to push it before. A lot of users going to the customer support site would be awesome. We've got a forum community there, so if you've got ideas, if you need help, use that. Use your account managers. Use your, you've got our information here, so just reach out to us. We're happy to help and try to help you, utilize mLevel in the best way possible within your organization. So talk about an example here. A microlearning strategy also fits really well in conjunction with that spaced learning example that we talked about. So something similar here. Maybe roll out a short introductory video on a given topic, then have like another game or assessment after that to kind of drive that baseline. The next week, follow that up with a brief video on that same topic, maybe a different video, and then another activity. So maybe something like Academy, where they can go through and do sort of their own self-assessment. So it takes a little bit more time, lets them absorb it a little bit more, gives them that feedback. And then finally use maybe 1 or 2 games for an assessment, or have some assessment activities there so you can kind of gauge how well they're learning and stuff. So, very similar to the other stuff that we talked about with the spaced learning examples. And then in each activity in this case would cover the same focused subset of content. So you want to kind of keep that content together. You don't want to, you want to do that repetition again in those bite-sized micro-learning chunks. So, and just another advantage to mention here of designing training in short bursts is that really allows you as an administrator or as an instructor or an instructional designer to pilot these short lessons. You can gather feedback quickly using a lot of our analytic tools, things like that. You can also put out surveys. Then you can iterate on these very quickly and then plan the next training slice, if you will. And then you've got a nice pattern for setting this up and using it multiple times. Great. So the next strategy we're going to talk about is feedback systems, and I think it's important for learners to receive immediate contextual and that corrective feedback in order to learn from making their mistakes. And then we also use feedback loops. So in some cases, we might even require users to go back and retry, sort of like this little graphic here shows. Based on, like, is it a correct response? Yeah, you want to give them that feedback that says it's reinforcing, and yeah, you got it right, you can advance. Or if it's not correct, you want to give them that, that feedback that lets them know what the correct answer might be. And then if it's a true feedback loop, maybe you actually have them go back to that decision or challenge or question and have them respond again to see and make sure that they learned it and that they know it. Equally important, I think, is for instructors to gather that feedback and data about their programs. A lot of people use smiley charts or things like that, but I think looking at the actual data and analytics is super important and might be even more important than this, just to kind of help you identify those areas that people are struggling in or that people know, so you can kind of understand where your training programs need to either be strengthened or maybe you don't need to spend as much time in a few areas because people are really understanding those, or you're using e-learning to drive those things instead. Brian, any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, we can kind of talk. There are a couple of things in terms of feedback. This slide has a few things that I think are core about feedback to the learner during the training, and some of this you just touched on, Jeff. But I think part of what I've always felt was very sound about mLevel from the way it was put together to facilitate learning is its ability to if an answer choice is selected or it turns out to be a distractor or a wrong answer, you get immediate feedback that it's a wrong answer. But a lot of the newer activities like Pathfinder and Academy also have the ability to provide not only the fact that it was an incorrect answer, but additional feedback that the developer of that activity and that mission can put in there so that they can get feedback and remediation based on which incorrect answer they selected. The other thing that I think, oftentimes is not talked about a lot with mLevel, but the feedback loop that's been built into it is the best I've seen. With any system like this in the industry. And for those of you that have played the activities, you go through, you play the game, you see where you got right, wrong answers, etc. When the gameplay is completed, you see a series of 3 screens. One of them is, this is how I did. It's my current score for this last gameplay compared to my best score compared to my peer average. I got an icon there. I can go check where I am on the leaderboard, etc. So that really feeds the engagement, the sense of play, the sense of competition. The next screen, though, for those of you that have played the games, summarizes everything relating to what you missed, what the question was, what you answered, and what the correct answer was. So the learner has the ability to go through and begin to make those connections from a knowledge point of view to improve their score, to improve their level of competition against their colleagues. One of the most valuable things, though, is the third screen, which lists out all of the items covered by that game that the person missed, and they only need to touch a button that says add this to my study list, and then they can go right back to Knowledge Navigator and begin to use the My Study List as a funnel for all of the information that's in that particular topic and funnel it down to just what I need to know, either because I manually selected it to add to my study list or because it relates to stuff I missed in the game. That is a terrific loop to have in any learning solution or learning technology that you employ. And I think it's a really valuable part of mLevel because it does ensure that it's more than just playing a game until I get a high score. That whole loop is there, it's automated, it's available for the learner to actually study the content, play a game related to it, and then get into this feedback loop. The second thing, Jeff, on the next slide are a couple things that are really feedback systems relating to after the training is over. The two obvious ones, one you mentioned is a survey, but you can actually include as the last activity in a mission a link to external link activity to link out to a survey where they can click on that and say, you're going to get your last 3 mastery stars in this mission. Go give us some quick feedback. It's going to link you to a web page where you can figure out a short survey and answer the questions and provide the feedback. And then the other one, obviously, we've talked about a bit as well, is after the training, having the folks that manage the training, be they trainers, administrators, designers, etc., go back and take a look at the analytics. It's not only where did people rank and what score did they get, but really it offers a really valuable deep dive into the effectiveness of the questions, areas that people are having problems assimilating, and with how quickly mLevel content and missions can be developed, you can identify areas for potential remediation and literally have the remediation training out the next day. So I think the feedback system, both at the learner level and at the organizational level that's built into mLevel, are really what provide a lot of the core value, to organizations that have implemented it. Jeff?
Yeah, I think at mLevel here we see the need to use all of those strategies around this feedback, whether it's by the learner, for the learner, or if it's for the trainer or if it's for the managers. I think that's kind of a use case that I think a lot of people overlook is collecting that data around that mastery of content knowledge to the managers to sort of help those managers mentor people or provide support for those people in their areas of weakness, and then also identify their strengths as well so that they know what they're going to excel at. I think that's one thing that gets overlooked a lot, and I think it could be pretty powerful. All right, so another strategy that's often overlooked is the idea of pre-training. We talked briefly about this. The concept is to allow learners to level up before their classroom or e-learning training. It's a great way for them to set them up for success. So again, I'll let Brian speak to the power of this mLevel use case.
Sure. Well, we've begun talking to clients a little bit more about this, both at Game On Learning and with mLevel as well. There's research that indicates that somewhere between 10 to 20% of classroom learning is largely ineffective because the trainer needs to spend a reasonable amount of time to level up people that come to the class. Perhaps there wasn't pre-work, perhaps there was, people didn't complete it. If it's training that's very specific to an organization or an industry, or if it's technical in nature, there can be a lot of terminology, acronyms, and other sorts of things that, you know, the trainer ends up spending a lot of time just kind of getting everyone on the same page as to what they mean. That 10 to 20% of ineffective use of classroom time can be largely eliminated with pre-work that would consist of a short mLevel activity or two that would be more likely to be completed because it is more fun and entertaining. I mean, you know, in larger cities, people could be doing this on the subway or the train or something like that on the way to the class, or on the plane if you're flying them in for a class. But the idea is get people leveled up. Jeff, maybe that's another reason we can, you know, kind of have some branding around mLevel, because I really do think this is a very important strategy that could make the classroom training that all of our clients do a lot more effective if they think more about the use of mLevel as a pre-work activity where in 5, 10, 15 minutes they can go through and master all of that specialized terminology or the acronyms or the buzzwords or the whatever. They walk in and everyone's on the same page as it relates to that, and then the class is really going to be a lot more productive, leveraging the sorts of things that classroom training dynamics and trainers do extraordinarily well.
Great. Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think, again, I think this one's often overlooked as well, and I think just using it to, even as just an icebreaker activity or something like you mentioned, could be great to sort of generate that excitement about the class.
I do have a question pop up here in regards to what Brian was mentioning from Michelle McGrath. How do they enforce them taking the free training? Brian, I don't know if you have any ideas around that or if you can speak to that at all, but the question is, how do you enforce them to take the pre-training?
Well, I think there's no one answer for every organization, but that's a great question because I think all organizations do struggle with that, and oftentimes it takes a approach of coming up with that strategy over a few classes, to be honest with you, because if they didn't do the pre-work before, they may not do the mLevel level up exercise when they first show up. But I do think that in providing the assignment prior to the class, it can be communicated that this is expected. We're doing it differently and uniquely on this program. It's going to be a series of games. You can do it on your mobile device if you like, on your on the plane or sitting in the airport or something like that on the way in. And just be advised that the very first thing we're going to do when we start the class as a way to make introductions is we'll also review the leaderboard. And we'll kind of go through and see how everybody did and let the folks with the high scores talk some trash and things along those lines. Short, general answer. It doesn't apply to every situation, but I think a lot of it results from dialogue with each organization to kind of understand what you've tried to do, culturally what would make sense, etc. So hopefully that was an idea or two that might help. I hope it does, but if you'd like to chat a little bit more and brainstorm some, more information about what's worked and what hasn't worked in your organization, maybe we can figure out some additional things to do as part of that strategy to make sure they actually do it before they show up. Believe me, after you start doing this on a regular basis and the word gets out, even about the ideas that I've mentioned, a lot more people will have completed the pre-work before they show up. It's a colleague thing, it's a competition thing, etc.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention, was just the buzz from colleagues with the competitions, things like that. One thing that you can do in addition, I think the communication is a key part of just like sending that out and letting them know about it, but in addition, maybe doing some small prizes for like the top 3 leaderboard spots. Things like Starbucks gift cards that are nice, or if your company allows you, like for the top leaderboard spot, maybe do like a PTO or a half day or something like that. Little things like that could drive a lot of people useful to do that. Great. Any other questions? Nope. Good. Shouldn't say good, but we love to hear your questions. But we are almost at the end here, so we have our final strategy around using story and scenarios to create empathy and add that context and relevance for learners. So the idea of role-playing and allowing users to take small but powerful risks, I think it's very important in allowing them to fail safely. So I'm sure Brian has a few additional thoughts around this as well, and then I'll go ahead and share a few examples of how you might accomplish this using mLevel as well.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, not a lot to add, but I do think this is really, to a large extent, the crux of the value of particularly more skill and behavior-based training, in my opinion. Stories, scenarios do two major things. The first major thing they do is to provide context. In other words, okay, here's the knowledge you need, but here's some examples, here's some stories about, you know, how that knowledge would be leveraged by you. You know, when you think about the way people learn, whether or not they're new employees or they've been with the organization for 20 plus years, you know, it's really all about, you know, kind of acquiring knowledge, and then it's about assimilating knowledge, and then it's about applying knowledge. And each one of those begins with an A, and if there was a great organization out there called AAA, Jeff, I think we could be onto something by trademarking.
I like that, yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, the context is critical, because the context, number one, allows us to assimilate better. We know how to organize it in our heads. But most importantly, from an application point of view, we know how to leverage it in the job. And so that's what's critical to me with facilities like Pathfinder and other activities with mLevel. Think of some of the obvious ones here on the slide. Being able to create scenarios around communication. Okay, I went through this mission to teach me certain product knowledge, but how am I going to apply that knowledge in a conversation with a customer? If I'm a customer support or customer service rep, or if I'm a salesperson, how do I take that knowledge, and if I get a tough question, how do I respond in a way that's going to leverage the knowledge but also produce the intended result, which is, a person satisfied with the answer or a satisfied customer, et cetera. Same thing for leadership training. The other areas where stories and scenarios, now we're talking about scenarios, are critical beyond the behaviors, based in sales, customer service, and leadership, are areas around processes and procedures, which could be compliance related, but it could also be, if you have field technicians, or other things where there's a certain process or procedure to either do a repair or to perform a safety procedure. Imagine the power of being able to have a video activity that shows how it's done, and then take them through a Pathfinder that allows them to kind of explore and make mistakes in a safe environment and so forth with the multi-path branching scenarios. And, it's very, very key to moving from assimilating knowledge to actually being able to apply it on the job in order to improve behavior. And lastly, there's some excellent things that all of these have to do with, corporate branding, storytelling, beginning to embed culture, and things along those lines, Jeff. So hopefully those comments are helpful to those on the webinar.
Great, yeah, and I'll just dive into a few actual examples here. So this is an example of using branding and activity configuration to tell a contextual story. So we were recently exhibiting at DevLearn in Las Vegas, and we used mLevel's branding and configuration capabilities to create this Vegas-themed experience with content, stories, and visuals. So it was pretty well received. It looked, it was relevant to the content as well. So we had them learn about some of the hotels in the area. We had them learn about some of the speakers, and just some history about Las Vegas. So it really blended very well together, and I think, it told a story very nicely. And then In terms of scenarios, this is our classic example of using Pathfinder's branching capabilities to create a feedback loop, sort of allowing users to get back on that right path and see if they've learned from their mistakes. So this happens to be sort of how we position us as like having scenes, and you can see like the 100% correct answers and the 50% partially correct answers, the 0% answers, and then you have certain endings. You've got certain loops that you can go back. This one just happens to have one, but alternatively, you can also force them to go back at the start of each scene until they answer correctly, if that's something that you desire to do. So mLevel makes it very sort of robust, and you can do a lot of different things, especially with the Pathfinder activities. So I think that's about all we have today. So I'm going to take a moment to just allow people to think about if they have any questions. We can answer some questions. Again, if you have a question, you can ask it by typing it into the questions panel, or you can raise your hand using the hand icon, and we can unmute your phone line so you can talk and ask your question. While we do that, I'll just go ahead and give a selfless plug for our next webinar, which is going to be November 18th. We'll be talking about the 8 motivators of learning and sort of the best ways to motivate learners and how to use mLevel to apply and achieve these motivations. So that will be happening on Wednesday, November 18th, same time, 10 a.m. Central. We'll go back to some questions and answers here, and I think we've got at least a couple lined up here. So one coming in that says, can you talk a bit more about how I might use video in mLevel and how to measure it? So Brian, I don't know if you want to handle that one.
I'll take a stab, Jeff. Well, one thing that's great about video or about mLevel is the video activity, and I happen to be a huge proponent of video as a learning activity. All of us, no matter what generation we're in, are now conditioned to it. We watch it on TV or movies or YouTube or what have you, and because it appeals to multiple senses, with everything that can be done on the screen as well as the audio, it's a fantastic way to for people to learn, either to receive information or to see positive and negative examples of certain behaviors, skills, etc. The problem is, as Jeff mentioned earlier, video is not trackable. You can determine in most cases that they watched it, or at least that they started watching it, but you don't know really what they got out of it. And a great best practice with mLevel is to put a game activity right after the video that assesses what they learned and whether or not they got out of the video what you want them to get out of it. And I would love to see a lot more video segments used within mLevel missions by all of our customers, because it is so dynamic that way, and mLevel does cure the one downside video has always had. It doesn't have to be Broadway, Hollywood quality. It's very inexpensive to make very helpful videos now. So that's just my 2 cents. But Jeff, I hope that helps.
We do have a follow-up question on videos. Can you use videos in other activities such as Pathfinder?
Yeah, so that's kind of put this screen up here so you can kind of see, we talked about it in the beginning. So there's 2 ways that you can use video in mLevel. One, there's a specific activity that's just for video, that all you do is you play the video, and then you basically get 3 stars for watching the video, or at least starting to watch it. As Brian alluded to, we can't really track whether they finished it, but we can track whether they opened it or not. And then, the other way you can do it is use Pathfinder. So you can have a scene within Pathfinder that uses what we call a video slide. What this allows you to do is you could embed multiple videos within one Pathfinder activity, and then you could set up a quiz at the end of each of those videos if you'd like to do that. So I think, again, as Brian alluded to, be some really nice ways to use video here and sort of measure that directly. Cool, and then so we got another question here. Do all mLevel games include feedback loops? So I can probably take that one. So let's go back over here real quick to the feedback loop section. So all of our games don't include feedback loops per se, but they all include some sort of feedback. So if I go here, so we do have all of our games at least support that real-time learner feedback of that point of when you select a right or wrong answer, it will let you know whether you got it right or wrong. And if you get it wrong, it will actually show you the correct answer so that you can kind of understand and learn that at that time. And then we have activities like Pathfinder and Academy that allow for that contextual feedback. So as an admin or an instructional designer, you can go in and type your feedback in, and it'll actually show at that point as well. So for instance, if you got something wrong, you could say, hey, that wasn't a great answer. You should probably think about doing this instead. This would be a better answer, those types of feedbacks. And then feedback loops for, say, right now, Pathfinder, I think, is the only activity that really allows that full feedback loop of if they get it wrong and they have to go back and try it again. Now, maybe Checkpoint, I guess, has a little bit of that built into it where you get a second and third attempt. So that is, I guess, a little bit of a feedback loop. Brian, any other thoughts on that?
Brian, just to interject, when I was kind of going through the closed loop thing, which involves getting the getting the remediation at the end of each gameplay, being able to add things dynamically to a to their study list, go back and review that, and then reattempt the game again. That loop there, which I think is really helpful, applies to almost all of the games. I'm trying to go through it in my head, Jeff. You're going to be a lot better at this. In terms of 3 screens at the end, the ability to add this my study list, etc. Are there any of the games, that don't have that? And in some cases, it may be because it replaces some other things, like you were saying with Pathfinder. But that's the other application of the notion of feedback.
Yeah, all of the games do have those screens, with the exception of, I think, Academy, which isn't really a game. It's more of a self-assessment activity. So that sort of shows you your progress in a different way. But all of the games actually utilize that end-of-game screen feedback.
Yeah. So 11 for 11 or whatever we have, because with Academy, it's a different thing with the adaptive learning. The idea is to play it until you master all of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Good.
I think we've got 2 minutes left. I think we've got one final question, and it was more just do you have any more ideas around onboarding? So I don't know if that's like training or maybe just like new hire onboarding. What do you think, Brian?
The answer to that, given the fact that we've probably only got a minute, is yes, we do. A lot more activities or ideas around that. That's a whole area that mLevel can be extraordinarily valuable in. So to whoever asked that question or any others that think that's a good one, I would encourage you to reach out to your main contact at mLevel, and we can tee up some conversations to explore that.
Great. Well, I just want to say thanks to everyone for joining us today. And Brian, it was a pleasure presenting with you. I'm looking forward to presenting more often with you. And welcome to the team.
Thank you. It's been fun. I enjoyed it. And hopefully, Jeff, between the two of us, we provided some helpful ideas for folks.
Yeah, I'm hoping to. And just a reminder, if you didn't catch all of this or you want to go back and review it, this will be posted to our support center fairly soon. We'll send out a follow-up survey as well, so you can be sure to find more information coming your way. Any other ideas? No?
Nope.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon. We'll see you in November.
Thank you.
Thanks all.